She was just 22 when the world learned her name, not through achievement, but through scandal. Overnight, Monica Lewinsky became the face of one of the most publicized political controversies in American history. Her life was no longer her own. Headlines devoured her privacy, jokes reduced her to a punchline, and the internet, still new and unfiltered, amplified the shame until it echoed louder than her voice. She hadn't signed up for this kind of history, but it shaped her anyway. Behind the tabloid frenzy was a young woman grappling with betrayal, power imbalances, and a system that was never built to protect her. She wasn't just shamed, she was professionally frozen, publicly dissected, and legally cornered. Each headline, each late-night monologue, chipped away at the person behind the name. No apology softened the spotlight. No space was left for context. The story was set before she had the chance to speak. But silence wasn't her final chapter. The same internet that once vilified her would, years later, help her reclaim her voice. Not through revenge, through reckoning. In the wreckage, she started from scratch. There was no map, no mentor, no clean slate, just the weight of a past that followed every job interview, every Google search, every room she entered. At first, every attempt to move forward came with backlash. Offers arrived with strings. Opportunities were shaped by her scandal, not her skill. But she kept showing up. Slowly, her voice returned, not louder, but stronger. Her essays didn't beg for sympathy. They demanded recognition. She didn't reinvent herself overnight. It took years to be seen as more than a mistake. Bit by bit, she stepped into the version of herself that had been buried under years of noise. She spoke about shame before it was trending. She turned pain into purpose before it was profitable. And through it all, she never chased a headline. She built something quieter and more lasting. This wasn't a perfect return, but it was real. She didn't grow up in silence or obscurity. Monica Lewinsky was born into a world of comfort, privilege, and legacy. Her Beverly Hills upbringing came with elite schools, wealth, and connections, but beneath the polished exterior, the cracks were already forming. Her parents' divorce was bitter and chaotic, leaving emotional scars that no lifestyle could erase. It shaped how she saw power and intimacy, twisting them together before she had the words to name it. Monica found some refuge in school, theater, choir, the little worlds where performance could mask real pain. But even those escapes didn't last. When her drama teacher died by suicide, another emotional fracture appeared, and she transferred to a prep school built to manage kids like her, troubled, wealthy, brilliant, and quietly unraveling. There, she thrived academically, but something deeper was still unresolved. A long, secret affair with a married teacher became a pattern, a need for connection that kept finding the wrong outlets. He moved cities to stay near her. She stayed trapped in a version of love that came with no future, only echoes of loss and secrecy. At Lewis and Clark College, she studied psychology, drawn to the workings of the human mind, perhaps hoping to decode her own. But nothing about her life felt settled. She struggled socially, never quite belonging, always carrying too much inside to hide convincingly. Therapy became essential, not optional. She juggled jobs, sought direction, and kept trying to define herself beyond her past. When her mother's connections landed her an unpaid White House internship, it wasn't just a career step, it was a door opening into another world. She wasn't ready for what waited behind it. The timing was strange. A government shutdown left most staff home, and the interns remained. Power and proximity blurred. President Clinton noticed her. He was charming, experienced, and twice her age. What began as attention turned quickly into something more, relationship hidden in late-night calls, small gifts, and whispered promises. For 18 months, the affair continued in silence, tangled in secrecy and imbalance. She wasn't just involved, she was invested. But nothing about it was built to last. When the scandal broke, the impact wasn't slow, it was explosive. The infamous blue dress became more than a piece of clothing. It was proof, and that proof became spectacle. The public didn't just react, they attacked. Monica was painted as obsessed, unstable, dishonest. The White House narrative turned her into a cautionary tale, as if she had engineered her own downfall. There was no mercy in the coverage, no pause for humanity. Every detail of her private life became fuel for headlines, jokes, and judgment. Online forums tore her apart. News anchors dissected her tears. Late-night hosts made her humiliation their opening act. She wasn't a person anymore, just a symbol. Her mental health spiraled. She fell into despair, isolation, and unbearable pressure. Eventually, she accepted immunity in exchange for full cooperation. That choice cost her, but protected her from worse. She had lied under oath to shield him. His testimony, carefully worded and measured, only deepened the confusion. The impeachment came, but it wasn't clean justice, it was spectacle. He kept his power. She lost everything. Monica tried to rebuild, but every step forward brought new reminders of her past. She appeared on television, tried launching a handbag line, and even hosted a reality dating show. But the world wasn't ready to let her be someone else. Every move seemed to echo back to 1998. Criticism followed her attempts at reinvention, often louder than any praise. Still, something shifted. She began speaking not for fame, but for understanding. Her 2014 essay in Vanity Fair broke through. It was raw, clear, and unflinching. She didn't ask to be pitted. She just wanted the truth of her experience to exist outside the noise. In 2015, her TED Talk pushed the story further. She spoke of shame, of being the first public figure destroyed by internet humiliation. Her voice, once drowned in scandal, had found steadiness. She wasn't rewriting the past, she was reclaiming herself from it. Her later work, including producing Impeachment, American Crime Story, gave her control over her narrative. She walked away from big money offers that didn't align with her values. She wasn't chasing a spotlight anymore. She was stepping back into her story, on her own terms. The moment the public learned her name, Monica Lewinsky became something less than human in the eyes of millions. The gravity of the scandal had already shifted political ground, but for her, it dismantled every part of a life she had only just begun to build. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Friends vanished. Professional doors slammed shut before she could knock. Strangers believed they knew her, dissected her motives, her emotions, her silence. She wasn't a politician, a strategist, or a spin doctor. She was 24, alone, and carrying the full weight of a nation's shame. When she entered legal negotiations, she was still in shock. The immunity deal was a trade, her protection for the truth. But telling the truth came at a cost. She had to recount every detail, every encounter, every painful misstep, all while knowing the world would read between the lines, twist the facts, and mock the pain. Her lie under oath, meant to protect someone she cared for, became ammunition used against her. Her honesty was not treated as bravery. It was parsed, doubted, and commodified. The media storm reached a scale few had endured before. Monica wasn't just in the middle of a story. She had become the story, and that story was never hers to begin with. In private, she broke down. The pressure was unrelenting. The cruel jokes, the invasive coverage, the weight of legal threats, it built a suffocating silence around her. She wasn't just grieving a relationship or lost trust. She was grieving the loss of a future that had been stolen from her without warning. Public discourse reduced her to a punchline. The headlines weren't subtle. Neither were the late-night monologues or primetime skits that turned her lowest moment into a cultural obsession. Shame became her shadow. She couldn't leave it behind, not in public, not in private. Her identity was rewritten in front of the world, and there was no permission to erase it. While the president defended himself with measured, strategic language, she was portrayed as erratic, emotional, and unreliable. That imbalance echoed everywhere, on television, in courtrooms, on magazine covers. The impeachment hearings became theater. The cameras were fixated. But she had already been convicted in the court of public opinion. Her role in it all was complex, human, flawed, and none of that complexity was allowed to surface. The scandal had to be simple, And she had to be the problem. When the spotlight dimmed, it didn't disappear. It lingered like a warning. Monica tried to step forward, but the ground beneath her shifted with every attempt. Business ventures were met with mockery. Media appearances were dissected for signs of profit, desperation, or self-pity. Even silence was criticized. She wasn't allowed to move on, but staying frozen would destroy her. Her decision to write, to speak, to claim her experience was not about rebranding. It was survival. The 2014 Vanity Fair essay didn't offer closure. It cracked open the narrative that had held her hostage. For the first time, her voice cut through the noise. She spoke about the emotional wreckage with clarity, without defense or dramatics. It was honest, and it was hers. That single act became a turning point. It didn't undo the past. It didn't win back public favor. But it proved that her story could be more than scandal. It could hold meaning, not just memory. Her 2015 TED Talk built on that moment. She stood in front of an audience, not as a headline, but as someone who had survived it. Her words held weight because they came from the ruins. Monica's past didn't disappear, but the power it had over her began to shift. With each new project, she stepped further into authorship of her life. Working on Impeachment, American Crime Story, wasn't just about setting the record straight. It was about finally being in the room where her story was being retold. She didn't chase sympathy. She demanded accuracy.
And that shift mattered.
It gave her control that had been stripped from her for decades. Her choices since then weren't about spectacle, they were about intention. She declined offers that could have made her rich, because they didn't align with who she was becoming. This wasn't a redemption arc for the cameras. It was a slow, private rebuild. It didn't look like success in the way fame usually does. But it was solid, grounded, and earned. And in a culture that once chewed her up and discarded her, she became something rare, resilient not in spite of her story, but because of it. The scandal never disappeared. But it no longer defined her. What came next did. By 2025, Monica Lewinsky had stepped into a role that once seemed impossible. One defined by reflection, purpose, and quiet authority. The same internet that once tore her down had become a place where her voice carried meaning. She launched a podcast, not to rehash the scandal, but to offer something she never had: space to tell your story without shame. Each episode carried traces of her journey, woven into conversations about public humiliation, resilience, and reclaiming identity. Her voice was steady, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had learned how to carry it. Her story didn't erase the trauma, but it offered proof that someone could live through it and still find something worth building. There were no dramatic reinventions, no sweeping absolutions, just the daily work of healing. She didn't rise above her past. She walked through it, step by step, refusing to let it be the end. The world still knew her name. That never changed. But the meaning of that name began to shift. She no longer moved through life defined by scandal alone. She became a voice for those who had been mocked, dismissed, and shamed into silence. And that voice didn't scream. It resonated. Her advocacy wasn't abstract. It was grounded in every courtroom memory, every headline, every night spent trying to survive the weight of judgment. Her experiences gave her language for others' pain. And she used it without spectacle. The opportunities she took were deliberate, not reactive. She didn't chase forgiveness or applause. She chose clarity. She chose truth. She chose to stop hiding from a story that was never fully hers to begin with. Over time, the tone around her began to shift, not because the world had changed, but because she had. Her strength wasn't loud. It was lasting. And that kind of strength doesn't fade. The wealth she never chased became its own quiet stance. She had turned down book deals, TV specials, and payday interviews that didn't feel right. Not because she didn't need the money, but because she needed the story to matter more than the check. She lived with less, but on her own terms. Her work wasn't built for tabloids, it was built to last. Collaborating on the retelling of her own history gave her something few people in her position ever receive: control. Her involvement in scripted retellings like Impeachment, American Crime Story gave her a seat at the table, not just a character in someone else's version. She didn't rewrite history.
She clarified it.
Her public appearances became more measured, more intentional, and each one carried weight not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned presence. What once felt like an ending had evolved into a second beginning, one built with care, not headlines. This wasn't a redemption arc written for the cameras. It was something slower, harder, and more real. Monica Lewinsky didn't forget what happened. She lived it fully, carried its consequences, and still found her way forward. She wasn't erased by history, she outlasted it. Her journey wasn't clean, and it wasn't easy, but it was hers. And in the end, that mattered more than public opinion, more than politics, more than legacy. She became a reminder that the stories people tell about you are never as powerful as the story you choose to live. Her past didn't define her future.
Her choices did.
And by refusing to disappear, she reshaped what survival looked like, not through perfection, but through persistence. Step by step, she found a way back. They counted her out, but she wasn't done. This wasn't a perfect return, but it was real.